What makes the mobile world exciting to Kargo is that the mobile device is the most dominant device in media today. And while people might have felt that that was true for some time, 2019 actually marks the first year that the mobile device is the most looked at device in America by any age group. Millennials and Gen Z, that's been true for a long time, but in 2019, at 3 hours and 43 minutes, the mobile device now surpasses time spent with TV for the average American. That's the first time that that's been true, and it's still on an upward trajectory. So even after 10 years since the iPhone first premiered, the mobile device is only getting more interesting and more important in people's daily lives. 98% of millennials and close to 98% of iGen or Gen Z own a smartphone, and they are the current and future consumers for every marketer out there. There's a stat that says 1 out of 10 millennials would rather give up one of their fingers than get rid of their smartphone. And there's another stat that says 23% of millennials would sacrifice one of their 5 senses rather than give up their phone. This is a device that they carry in their pockets every day. It's the most important device for their lives, and I think that's why it makes it the most important device for marketers. Kargo's biggest piece of advice to marketers around the smartphone is really to just use common sense. We use these smartphones every day in our daily lives, and we know how we experience marketing on these phones. And yet when we put our sort of agency and marketing hats on, it's as if we sort of throw all of that to the wind and forget what it's like to be a consumer. More specifically, there are 3 areas that marketers should be aware of. One is this stat. There are 600 million ad blockers installed globally. That's the largest boycott of any product or service in human history. That is not a stat that our industry should be proud of, and a lot of it comes out of putting bad ad experiences on a personal device. So non-skippable pre-roll ads, clunky interstitial ads, all of this has led to consumers opting out of mobile marketing at a time that we really need them to be opted in. eMarketer just published an interesting stat that says there's roughly 100 million missing digital consumers in the ecosystem due to ad blocking. Those are people that are now unreachable because of the damage that bad advertising has done. The second thing that I would urge marketers to look out for is ad fraud. We still are running too many ads on the open exchange, and the industry has bought into this idea that you can get audiences for cheap on the long tail. Forrester published a study last year that said the average person has 30 apps on their phone and they spend 90% of their time in 5 of them, and that the average person visits 60 websites in a year and spends 90% of their time, again, on 5 of them. Put this in perspective, there are 6 million apps in the App Store and 350 million sites on the internet. And we spend too much time as an industry trying to buy audiences as cheap as possible across that large expanse. There's really big repercussions to this. One is that we're buying a ton of fraud. As we've seen even last year, a bunch of Android apps were shut down despite being audited by all of these companies that supposedly say they can detect fraud. It was the biggest fraud perpetrated to date. And the second, I think, big ramification of this is that we see publishers like BuzzFeed laying off journalists because they can't attract enough money to their websites. The third thing I think people should be aware of is what we call, at Kargo, we call invisible ads. This is the phenomenon of ads actually being on the phone, but no one really looking at them. An interesting stat that I learned of last year is that the average person is shown 350 ad messages digitally on their phone and desktop a day. Yet when you ask somebody to recall a single ad that they saw yesterday or even today, many people struggle to even name one. This seems to Kargo to be a bigger problem than even ad fraud, which wastes about 20% of the industry's money. When you have statistics that say 70% of the ads are not even looked at, the amount of waste, if you calculate that as a percentage of the $100 billion annual spend on digital ads, dwarfs the amount of money that we're wasting on fraud. So getting creatives that can actually catch the eye and get people to stop and look at the ad is something that we should think about in our mobile marketing. There was a documentary that came out recently that was pretty popular about the Fire Festival and what a disaster it was. But I think that there was one interesting takeaway from that documentary. When they did their ad campaign to get people to know about the Fire Festival, they blasted out a single orange box on Instagram. And it was so odd and interesting that it got everybody to stop scrolling and look at it. And the people that put that campaign together thought a long time about what creative could actually get someone who's scrolling at 500 pixels per second to stop and take notice of an ad. I think more marketers need to think about when they're doing mobile advertising, what is their equivalent of that? What are they doing in the creative that's actually going to stop people in their tracks and get them to look at the ad experience? Kargo believes the top priorities of the IAB going into next year around mobile marketing, I think, are twofold. One, creative. Kargo talks a lot about this because we're a creative company, but we see it in all the statistics, some of which I've already mentioned, that we're exposed to hundreds of ads a day that we don't even register. Platforms like Instagram, I think, have a lot to teach the rest of mobile marketing. A focus on the visual of the ad, a focus on the creativity. Too much time is being spent on audience targeting and not enough time on making an ad that's actually going to stop people from scrolling to take notice. The second priority, I think, for the IAB needs to be around identity. And this has been talked about a lot. There are a lot of different identity consortiums that exist today. But it's a big problem for publishers. Again, what you're seeing is mass layoffs at a lot of media companies due to their inability to monetize these media websites. That's affecting really big societal things like the quality of journalism potentially. The idea is not just about targeting, it's about actually crediting the effectiveness of the ads. And because mobile devices outside of the big social gardens like the Facebooks of the world or the Googles of the world don't have good identities, it's hard to give them proper credit for the ads that run there. And I think that's an important nuance. When we think about the lack of a persistent identity, we normally think of our inability to target people, but we also have to think about our inability to measure the effectiveness of the ads. We've seen in some preliminary studies where the identity solution is stronger, that the ads actually perform on mobile websites like the websites of these big media companies. The ads actually perform a lot better than I think the industry is imagining based on their current read. So if we can make the fidelity of that measurement stronger, I think you would get more credit going to publishers, and that would help to monetize some of these media companies where they're currently struggling. Kargo joined the IAB as a board member because we realize, I think like a lot of other companies in this space, that if you want to change the industry, you can't do it as a single vendor. What I love about the IAB and about the mobile board is it brings together thought leaders from all over the industry and across a lot of vendors. And I think to change the types of things that need changing in the industry, you need that type of coordination. I mean, it's one thing for Kargo to go to a marketer and say that we think mobile ad creative is more important than they maybe currently estimate that it is. And it's another thing if IAB publishes best practices. So I think together, the IAB with all of the members is able to affect change that can't come from maybe a single place. And I do think that the industry does need to change. When we look at some of the stats that I've sort of mentioned here, when you look at the number of ad blockers that are installed globally, when you look at media companies laying off journalists, there's still a lot to be done to make the marketing better so that the publishing ecosystem can thrive. And I think that's something that only an institution like the IAB with all of its members can attempt to fix.